the big drive for me to get into business was freedom. I always wanted to have agency over my own life. I knew that really early, and I just couldn't really see myself in a job.
The minute you start making decisions, investment decisions on how much you can make right now today, you start making the wrong decisions for your family from an investment point of view.
So many people have ideas for products to sell on the internet, but they don't know where to start.
Today, any entrepreneur anywhere in the world can simply sell their product on Amazon and have Amazon do the fulfillment, the warehousing, and take care of all the hard stuff that stopped a lot of people previously. Now, young people can't even have kids because our money's broken. But everybody's going, oh, it's just inflation. No, the Aussie dollar is becoming worth less and less and less. I've been sort of unemployable since I was a teenager. The idea of turning up somewhere, being told what to do, when to do, how to do it, and then repeat, just didn't fit me.
Adam Hudson, if someone has just pushed play on this episode, who are you, and then why should they stick around to listen to this episode today?
I think an accurate description would be a teacher and a creative soul who's masqueraded as an entrepreneur for 30 years and has recently had a midlife crisis or hit the reset button in my life after chasing money for most of it and exploring a whole different way to live.
Yeah, that we are going to dive into that because that is really exciting. You're recently been up on the Gold Coast there with the Unemployable Boys on the podcast, which we love. And then you've made the leap to move overseas to Cyprus. And we're loving watching the journey on everything that you're going through at the moment to make that move, which I'm sure is not an easy thing to do. We'll get into that a little bit later on. But let's start off with chasing the money and how you got motivated to jump into the entrepreneurial lifestyle.
Yeah, I think from very early on, I kind of have retraced this recently because I've been doing a lot of personal growth work again in my very, very early 50s. When I turned 50, I went back and asked some big questions. And I realized that the big drive for me to get into business was freedom. Was something very, very high on my list. I always wanted to have agency over my own life. And I knew that really early, and I just couldn't really see myself in a job, and you mentioned the podcast. I'm wearing the hat right now, unemployable. I've been sort of unemployable since I was a teenager. The idea of turning up somewhere, being told what to do, when to do, how to do it, and then repeat every single day for the next 30, 40 years, and then just incrementally just go further up in that singular channel just didn't fit me. And I think that's because I am a creative soul. I've got an artistic soul. And I think a lot of people do, whether it's expressed or not. I think as humans, that's our nature. And if we see kids, it's not very hard to spot that. So I sort of knew that I had this entrepreneurial bent, but I didn't even know the word entrepreneur until one day at church, a guy turned up in his new Porsche 911. And I was like, what does that guy do? And somebody said, he's an entrepreneur. And I was like, what's an entrepreneur? And they said he runs his own businesses and he invests in real estate and he runs a bunch of photographic shops, 1 hour photo shops. I'm showing my age here. And so I got talking to this guy, I became friends with him, and I learned about making my own money rather than, getting a degree, getting a job, and then following that career path. And so that set me on that path. And then I sort of joined Amway because it was the first thing that somebody showed me. He said, oh, here's this promising young guy who's always interested in business. And they recruited me into Amway. And the good thing about Amway is it got me reading books. So I read The Magic of Thinking Big by Dr. David Schwartz or Douglas Schwartz, can't remember. The Richest Man in Babylon. And these were the first books I'd encountered in my life that I actually was interested in. And I was like, oh my God, there's this whole genre of books about how to get ahead and how to create your own life and setting goals. Nobody had even told me that you could set a goal and then make it happen. So that's where the infancy of this whole journey came about. If that helps.
I mean, here in Australia, you're very much known as the Amazon expert. Can you kind of talk to why that is and how your Amazon journey started?
Yeah, so this move to Europe is the second overseas move I've done in my life. I did one earlier in life. I moved to Los Angeles in my late 30s. And when I moved to Los Angeles, I'd been an entrepreneur for nearly 20 years at that time. Some successes, mostly failures. And then when I was living in LA, I lived in an apartment building on the edge of Beverly Hills, and I noticed that every day there was all these packages turning up on the doorsteps of my neighbors from Amazon. And I was like, what is this Amazon thing? I thought it was just books. And I thought, man, my building reads a lot of books. But they were getting water and nappies and all sorts of products. And in America, Amazon, this is in 2012, was really starting to hit its stride. And so I learned about the opportunity to sell on Amazon, and what sort of got me was the fulfillment by Amazon piece, which means that you could get a product from China or anywhere and then stick it in their warehouses across America, and then they would sell it, distribute it, and so on. They send you a check once a month. I was like, this is unbelievable. I could be living in Australia and this business could carry on, or anywhere in the world. So I started doing that around the main business, which I had. The main business was an animation company that I started, and I ended up selling that company 4 or 5 years later. It just turned out to be a really successful business. And then when I got back to Australia, people were starting to ask me, and I've been selling on Amazon for 4 or 5 years at that time. They were like, dude, how did you build that Amazon business? Because I kept the Amazon business when I came back to Australia, and I was making US dollars. I was, it was a multi 7-figure a year business. And so I just started teaching people, and then I put it on. So I got my iPhone out and recorded my first course on an iPhone. And then I started selling the course and learned about how to sell courses. And it did really, really well, because I think the course was based on me having actually done it for 5 years and been successful at it, which is not always the case in courses.
Yeah.
Sonia and I were talking about you just as we're doing our research on you, and one thing that stands out is that it's hard to define exactly what you do.
Yeah.
You seem to always keep evolving and keep changing. Is that part of your success? Do you think that you haven't really locked yourself into one set position for your entire life? You've always been able to be fluid and move through different ideas and different positions as you grow?
Yeah, look, I don't know sometimes whether that's a superpower or a weakness, to be honest with you. Like I'm a guy that likes to go out into the middle of the jungle, find a couple of sticks, rub them together and see if I can start a fire. I really enjoy that process. But once the fire's going and I go, yes, that worked, the next 10 years after that, I find kind of boring. Like it's not my jam. And that's where I've always been good with finding really good business partners. So Joe, who was my business partner, Reliable, he's not the guy that goes out into the jungle. He's the guy that wants to find a guy like me who's gone out into the jungle, taken on the maximum risk, and I love that piece, whereas it terrifies most people, because the thought of doing that, they're like, oh my God, it's so lonely, it's so risky, So I've always found a good business partner, and my business partners, especially in the case of Joe, have been a big part of the success. Without those guys, that I wouldn't have achieved what I have. So I don't know if it's a superpower or a weakness, but it's something I enjoy. I'm a very curious person, so I'm always learning. Like I spend a couple of hours a day at least learning podcasts, YouTube, whatever. I have a real, genuine intellectual curiosity. The other thing that's, I think over the years I've learned about myself is that I act fast. So if I see an idea, I will get it up and running by the end of the week, whereas most people will spend 6 months just talking about it and thinking about it, whereas I've already done and failed by the time they even get to the start line.
So where does that appetite for risk come from? That is quite rare, and the fact that you're able to handle that and be resilient and deal with the upside and also the downside of risk. Where does that come from? Because I think that's a skill for a lot of people, especially for a lot of entrepreneurs, to understand what that is. Like where does that come from?
Look, I think I accept, because I think now I've just failed so many times that it's a bit like a boxer, right? Like a boxer, you can't be a boxer if you're afraid of getting hit. But the thing is, when you learn to box, you learn to take a hit, and you just learn to, that's just part of the game. But I'm also terrified by dying with the music still in me, like that question of, could I, or was it possible, or whatever. I'd rather just find out. So I've sort of lived very much the Eric Ries philosophy of the lean startup, which is try to validate my idea as quickly and as cheaply as possible, and be very willing to fail. And so often what I will do is I will announce to the world on my social media or to my friend network, hey guys, I'm doing this. And I will tell them, whereas most people don't. They do the opposite. They try and hide it away as long as possible. In case it fails, nobody sees, right? Whereas I do the exact opposite. So I tell people what I'm going to do, and then I start publishing what I'm going to do. And I say, and you know what? You should watch me, because it's very likely I'll fail. And I go into it with that attitude and mindset, but I'm going to give it a red hot crack. And a good example is I'm developing a product at the moment that I thought I would be launching the middle of last year, like 9 months ago. And I ran a seminar and I showed people what I was doing. I went through my whole business plan, and I still haven't got the product yet. It's, I'm 9 months late on getting the actual saleable product. That's what happens sometimes, So I think I just don't get caught up in what other people think, and I just get out there, give it a go, and I know, hey, look, I could fail, but if I am going to fail, I'm going to fail quick, and I'm going to fail as cheaply as possible.
Yeah.
I really like that idea of sharing it as well, especially on your socials. Because I guess the people that are seeing that, and when they catch up with you, they're able to hold you accountable to your commitment to, that you've said that you were going to do as well.
Yeah.
So, how is that project going, or where is it at now? They're going to ask you those questions publicly rather than, not knowing what to ask. And I think that's a great way of holding yourself accountable as well.
Definitely. Yeah.
Let's touch on failure as a whole, because I feel like so many people we've spoken to during these podcasts they always touch on it. And I mean, you're never going to learn unless you fail. What are some of the learnings that you've taken from your failures?
Well, the biggest thing about that whole subject is that all the learnings are in the failures. You don't learn much from success, so you've got to learn to start loving failure, and picking through the carnage and being objective about what did I do wrong. I honestly am not super bright. Like when I say that, I see a lot of young people coming through my own podcast who are in their 20s and early 30s that are just crushing it in their first or second business. I'm the type of guy who has to just go out and I'll make 10 failed businesses before I finally go, oh, that's what I was doing wrong, So, my superpower is just the ability to keep going. But I think objectivity is really, really powerful. Being able to really sit down and just let the ego go and say, what did I do wrong here? Truthfully, like not what is the version I'm telling myself that helps me manage my disappointment, but what is the actual truth here? And like a really simple example is, like, most people have probably lost money in cryptocurrency, right? And they go, crypto's this, crypto's that. And you're like, dude, you just didn't know enough, right? And the truth is, you probably would never know enough in crypto to compete with the people who do make money, right? That's the truth. You just had a mate of yours call you up and say, Solana's going to the moon.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, you're going to get rich tomorrow. Like, it's going to pump, bro.
Yeah.
And you go, yeah, you're right. And then in the post-analysis of why you bought it at 200 and sold it at 100, you said, oh, it's all just a scam. That's actually a lie. You based your investment decision on your mate Daryl over a couple of beers at a barbecue and 3 YouTube videos, right? So last week I was in Paris at blockchain week, and I sat next to a guy in his early 30s who's traded $400 billion in crypto. He's a market maker. Last year, his income was $100 million from crypto. So, so are there people that make money in crypto? Absolutely, there are people who make money in crypto, but they're never going to be me. I'm not that guy. I know myself well enough to know that. And I know the savages that do and how intelligent they are and so on. So it's about knowing yourself and being completely honest about why you really did fail, rather than just putting entire industries into the trash can and making yourself right and them wrong, because that's such an expensive thing to do. I
saw you at that event. At the Louvre in Paris, where they had the blockchain event there. What did you walk away from that event? Is there any piece of knowledge that you could share from that event that you gained?
Look, I paid for that. I went to Blockchain Week, which is kind of like a summit or a conference, right? So you've got the main stages, like 4 main stages, and then you've got all the exhibitors in the middle. So that ticket's like $1,000 or something, depending on which one you buy. So I bought a ticket for that. But then you can pay like $4,000 just to go to this one dinner and upgrade to VIP, which gave you a little, front of room access to the events. But the main thing I was paying for was that dinner. And the reason I pay the money to go to those dinners is because I know that people paying $4,000 to have dinner under the Louvre are going to be the cream of the crop of the people that attend the conference. And I want to be around those people and just see what I can learn. And I also wanted to have a cool night, like, a memory that, like we got a private tour of the Mona Lisa, when the Louvre is closed. Normally you got to line up for 3 hours to get in. There's tens of thousands of people in there at any one time. We were taken through personally and taken up to the Mona Lisa and could just stand there as long as we want in that hall where it is. But while I was standing there, like, to give you an idea of how insane that experience was, on one side I had Adam Back. So Adam Back is like I'm a big Bitcoin guy, right? So he's like, in all the research of who Satoshi Nakamoto is, his name is regularly one of the top 2 or 3 people that's likely to be Satoshi Nakamoto, right? The most unassuming British guy. He's a cryptographer, very, very smart guy. He's standing to my right. On my left is a guy called Dylan McClare, who's early 30s, runs the most successful Japanese. He's American. He's from Boston, but he runs a company called Metaplanet, which is the best performing stock in the Japanese stock market this year. Responsible for buying billions of dollars of Bitcoin. So I've got him on one side, I've got Adam back over here, and then there's all these other super heavyweight people just milling around. I can just walk up and say, hi, I'm Adam from Australia. So that's why I do that stuff, is I get out of it being around people that are way smarter than me. And I honestly felt like a bit of an imposter that night, but I experienced imposter syndrome, but I really love that because I know I'm pushing myself.
Yeah. Can someone who has no idea about Bitcoin, what would you tell me? Like, how can you make me understand it? Because I feel like that's the biggest hurdle with a lot of people who want to, say, dive into something like Bitcoin, but I would have no idea where to start. So, like, what advice would you give someone like me?
Look, Bitcoin is a journey, and I never say to people, just go buy Bitcoin. You shouldn't just go buy any asset until you really understand it, which is why I went to Paris Blockchain Week, because I really don't understand most cryptos outside of Bitcoin. So I was trying to understand that before I buy any of it. So I only own Bitcoin. So I would start with a book called The Bitcoin Standard by Seyfuddin Ammous. It's a fantastic book which just teaches you about the problem that exists and why Bitcoin's important. And 90% of the book is not about Bitcoin. It's just about money. And it explains in very simple terms that everyday people can understand why Bitcoin matters. And so I'd start there. And, otherwise, if you start me down that rabbit hole, it'll go on and on. But it's something that takes time.
Yeah, and I know you don't want to go down the rabbit hole here, but could you summarize what is the problem right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm happy to go in the rabbit hole. But in simple terms, if you think about money, it's an abstracted form of your time and energy. So what that means is when you go to work today, you, in return for that, you get a coupon, which we call $1 or $100 or $1,000. And that shows up in the form of digits in our bank account. And so it's an abstracted form of our time. And the problem is that because our governments continue to print more of this money, we have this thing called inflation. And Australians, for the most part, I assume a lot of your audience are Aussies, have been sort of shielded from inflation relative to many other countries around the world. There are countries in the world where their inflation is 100% a month. So a thing that cost $1 30 days ago is now $2. In Australia, the RBA tells us that, it's about their goal is 3% a year, and it got as high as 9% through COVID. And this is compounding each year. But what it effectively means is that the buying power of our dollar becomes less and less and less with every single passing minute. because they're putting more and more money into the system that is just printed. There's nothing else to it. They're just putting more, and that, of course, drives prices up. And we saw it through COVID when they helicoptered money into the system, dropped interest rates. All of a sudden, there's more money in the system. So what happened to real estate prices? What's happened now to our groceries in Australia? People go, oh my God, Coles and Woolies are gouging everybody. Partly true, but mostly their cost base has gone up because everything's gone up. So another way of thinking about this is that, a doctor or a nurse, let's say a nurse, she goes and does a day's work, or a school teacher, she stores some money for the future. I would like to live in a world where that money that she exchanged her time for, which she can't get back, it is unrecoverable. It is, that's a non-renewable resource where that time is still valued the same in the future. But what's happening in our country is that as a result of this inflation, we've turned our houses into hotels, we've turned our cars into taxis, and our bodies into porn, because we have to, right? Everybody's running an Airbnb, everybody's driving Ubers, everybody's spending their spare time, instead of being present with their kids, they're listening to podcasts and bettering themselves to make more money, because they know that life is getting more and more and more expensive, and they don't realize it's because our money's broken. What would it be like if a house today was not going to be worth twice as much in 20 years? We could all breathe. We could all relax. What if our carrots and apples stayed at the same price, right? We've been sold this lie that inflation is necessary, but it's eating away at the quality of our lives. And we're seeing, young people, you guys, when you were kids, our parents could buy a house for, 3 or 4 times their annual salary. Now it's 10 times, and the house that you get isn't on 1,000 square meters. It's on 400, and it isn't a double brick quality home. It's a fibro, poorly built by comparison to the quality back then. So we're getting far less for far more, and it's impacting. Yes, I spoke to a guy who said, I'm not having kids. He's a millennial. I'm not having kids because I can't afford them. Now young people can't even have kids because our money's broken. But everybody's going, oh, it's just inflation. No, the Aussie dollar is becoming worth less and less and less and less. And Bitcoin gives you sound money. It gives you a solution to that.
Okay.
That's a great explanation. And then now that I've opened this up, how does Bitcoin solve that? I guess that also helps people understand. Once you see the problem, how does Bitcoin solve that problem?
Yeah, so Bitcoin is the opposite of fiat currency, in the sense that you can't print more of it. One Bitcoin will always be one Bitcoin. There is no human centralized system that can be coerced, that can want to buy votes, like what you're seeing leading into the election right now. Where do you think all this money comes from that they're promising to buy votes, right? So when you stand politicians and human beings essentially next to a money printer, it is proven historically that they cannot resist the temptation to print because it's so easy. How good would it be if we could just print money? We all have to exchange time and energy for that. So in the Bitcoin universe, we have this technology that in order for a new Bitcoin to be minted, there'll only ever be 21 million, and about 4 million of them are lost over the years for people not understanding it. In order for somebody to print a new Bitcoin, real energy has to be exerted, right? There's a real cost to producing it. So you've got this money that is honest, that is immutable. So there's no intermediary. If you and I want to exchange value on that network, I don't have to go to the bank. I don't have to worry about the government layer in the middle of what's happening with the Australian dollar versus, the Argentine peso or the, pound. I can trade globally without any intermediary third party risk, right? There's just like peer-to-peer, which is the first line of the Bitcoin white paper, which is peer-to-peer monetary network. And how it solves it is it gives you an anti-inflationary, because every 4 years, the difficulty of getting a Bitcoin doubles because of the halving cycle. And so it gets harder and harder and harder to get those last remaining Bitcoin in the 21 million. So the cost of actually getting one through mining doubles, because the complexity of the problem doubles to get it, which means the electricity required is double. So you've got a deflationary monetary policy as opposed to an inflationary monetary policy that we live with in Australia. We're just told, just work a little bit harder, just drive that Uber, just start that side hustle. It'll be fine. What does it matter? You don't need 1,000 square meters of land. 400's fine, right? And our lives are a subject of shrinkflation. So Bitcoin basically says, no, a one Bitcoin will always be one Bitcoin. They get harder to get over time. And there's a fixed supply. So the more and more people say that Bitcoin is an IQ test because it is a journey to learn and understand it properly, because only thing we've ever known is fiat currency. So it takes a while to actually unwind and deprogram. And sometimes the big question, Simon, is people say, well, how can you say it's stable when it goes down 20%? And I'm like, go to ChatGPT and type in, if inflation is 5%, right? How much is the buying power of $1 in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 100 years? The answer is 100 Australian dollars 100 years ago today buys 83 cents. So it's almost deflated to zero in 1 and a bit lifetimes, right? So it's not that it might crash to zero. It is actually crashed to zero. So when Bitcoin has its volatilities of 10 and 20%, it's getting less over time. It's nothing compared to what's actually happening with our own money. It's just we don't see it as a crashing currency. We see it as rising costs.
Wow. That's a great explanation, because I feel like it's the first time I've actually kind of understood it in the easiest possible way. Obviously, there's so much to learn about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't want to ask that question sometimes as well. They don't want to look like they don't know what's going on in that space.
Correct.
And so it's really nice to have that kind of, there's the problem, there's the answer, and hopefully people can go and do their research and find out more about it. But thank you for doing that. It is good. Hey, look, we love your podcast, Unemployable. And so where did the idea of the podcast come from? What is it that you value about podcasting? I'm going to ask you 3 questions here in one question. But then also, what are you learning from YouTube as well, as far as jumping into that data from the podcast?
I'll start with the last question about YouTube, because I have sort of a love-hate relationship with YouTube and social media particularly. I think the incentives are really screwed up with social media and YouTube. They love controversy. Nothing gets more clicks than, a headline that screams, you have 2 days left until this is finished, or, blood on the streets, or like it's drama. And that's why you see these YouTube thumbnails of people with these overly expressive faces and fear and fire in the background. It's a science of drama, right? Quality doesn't necessarily rise to the top. We recently had a guy on who was co-founder of Xero, right? $25 billion business. I don't think it's even broken 1,000 views, but I have on something that's like, controversial, or, a political thing, click, 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 whatever's going to sort of get the masses wound up, they love. So what I've learned from YouTube is I'm and these things is I don't love the algorithms. I wish there was an algorithm where quality of intellect and content would rise to the top. But in terms of why we started it, I guess, I think podcasting is one of the most incredible advances in technology in my lifetime, because it democratizes intelligence and access to knowledge. When we were coming up, right, let's just look at it in the context of business. As an entrepreneur, I was craving information on how to become successful, in the business sense, right? So every year I'd wait for the BRW Rich List to come out in a printed magazine at the news agency, and I'd be first in line to see who are the young rich and then who's the rest of the rich people. And there'd be half a column and a photo, which was usually not even updated from the previous year. And I would read this 2 or 3 paragraphs, and then there'd be 2 or 3 that might be featured in there where they'd do a full story on them for the year. And that was it. There was no Googling and being able to sit down and watch Elon Musk give a keynote talk for an hour at Harvard University. Now you can literally get taught by Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, or the people who've just built incredible businesses, like Aussies like Simon Beard, right? He built Culture King. So you can sit down and listen to Simon talk for hours on YouTube because of all the podcasts he's done. So I love that. And I got into it because I was I think that it's a great way to have long form, meaningful conversations. It's a great way to document your own life and your own thoughts. And it's an incredible way to grow your network. Like the people who I've got in my phone now, even after just doing it for 1 year, has grown massively. I've got several billionaires. I've got, all kinds of interesting people as a result of the podcast. And as the audience grows, people want to be platformed and they want to be in that awareness space. So, yeah, we're just starting to now. We've seen some incredible results. Like we had a young lady on who she'd never really been on a podcast. She came on our podcast and did $3.5 million of sales of her product off the back of our podcast, like
wow.
directly
That's awesome.
off being with us for 1 hour. We had another guest on that generated $15 million in sales off the back of one podcast with us. So that's serious distribution and clout once you start growing at that level. And we haven't really figured out how to monetize it a lot yet. We don't make a lot of money from it. We make just enough through coaching to pay the bills, but we haven't taken any distributions or payments or salaries or anything in a year and a half.
Yeah.
It is interesting though. I mean, yeah, that networking, and I guess the skill set of podcasting is storytelling, right? Which is something that clearly you're very good at. And I think that's the thing that's moved through time. So it's moved from, and as you mentioned before with YouTube, the clickbaity, negative headlines, dragging you in. I guess that's nothing new as well. I guess the most popular TV show for the Australian audience would be in Australia with the most amount of ratings would have been A Current Affair in Australia.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was because it was always negative. It was about, Coles versus Woolworths. It was always the,
fear-mongering
all
as
those kind of
well.
stories. So I guess that it's the same type of thing in this new media that we're in. But yeah, it's sad to hear that, when you're talking to someone from zero, who could share a hell of a lot of knowledge with everybody, that's not getting the clicks.
And a nice guy, like a really nice guy. He's an American guy living in New Zealand. Just a quality individual, like super smart, has worked with the Beastie Boys, worked with like some big names. Yeah, and it just doesn't get the clicks because it doesn't come with the drama or whatever. So it's an interesting beast. But on balance, I think podcasting is a terrific tool. And if you have any inkling to do it, you should do it. But you have to be consistent with it. When we met Stephen Bartlett, Diary of a CEO, who just passed 10 million YouTube subs, probably I think the top podcast or top 5 podcasters in the world. And Stephen said, Adam, just be consistent. If you say you're going to publish every Friday at 10 a.m., publish every Friday at 10 a.m. And we started off with 1 podcast a week. We then went to 2, and now we're at 3 podcasts a week. And I'm doing 1 Bitcoin every 2 weeks that I'm contributing. And we're just consistently, and we're starting to see, when we got to 1,000 subs on YouTube, we're like, oh my God, we got 1,000 subs. And it didn't seem like a lot. And then we blinked and we were at 5,000 subs. And then we recorded an episode where the guys said, and this was in December, mid-December of 2024. And we were in the studio and one of the guys said, all right, what's our estimation? Where will we be by the end of 2025? And 3 out of 4 of us said, we'll be at 15,000 subs is the goal by the end of 2025. And we're in April now of 25 and we're at 15,000 already.
Brilliant.
That's
Love
awesome.
that.
So it's sort of hockey sticks like
Yes.
that once you start going. And people go, well, 15,000 subs is not much by YouTube standards. But if you see 15,000 people at a stadium, it's a lot of people.
Also, you haven't been doing it for that long. Like, look at the growth that you've had in such a short amount of time. It just goes to show how your consistency is paying off.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Adam, I wanted to ask you, you said something really interesting that I think I saw it on your socials, where you said Australia is dumb rich. Can you explain that, like what you mean by that, and how are we dumb rich?
Oh, no. Yeah. So look, I love Australia as a country, but I am getting to the point where I'm really frustrated with Australians because they, what I meant by that was that in Australia, a lot of our wealth is from resources. And so we dig holes and and we put the dirt on the back of a train, and then we put it on a ship and we send it off. And we're just so insanely blessed from a resources point of view, Whereas if you look at other countries, places like Sweden or Singapore or whatever, they are Singapore particularly is an economic miracle. They don't have the land mass. They don't have the resources. So they've had to be far more canny in how they create their wealth. And so Australia has been blessed with an amazing amount of resources. We have been blessed in so many ways that and so much wealth has been realized out of the financialization of real estate. Houses were never really meant to be financial tools. They're meant to be a place to live and provide safety. Now they've been financialized and Australians have become the gold medalists in real estate development and investment. And it's all well and good for the people who own assets. And now we're starting to see the problem with that, and we're starting to see that wealth gap open up. And ultimately it doesn't lead to a good outcome for society. And I first learned this when I moved to the US in my late 30s. I was a full-on capitalist, and I was all about, work hard. If you don't work, then, too bad, you don't get the success and all this. And then I would go out for my morning walk, and I would walk through Beverly Hills because I lived right on the edge of it. And I would see a homeless guy taking a dump in public on a bus stop, out the front of a $20 million US mansion. And I'm like, what kind of society is it if you make it all the way to the top and you can buy this $20 million house, but you got a homeless guy with mental health issues that nobody's taking care of, because the middle class just disappears. It just gets wiped out. And it happened through COVID. And for the first time, I think Aussie started to see this divide open up, and we're starting to now, there's a lot of anger in Aussies. There's this sort of underlying tenseness on the road. I can feel it. I can feel it when I'm out and about, where people are just stressed because you either owned assets and you cleaned up through this inflation of assets because all that money just ultimately found its way into assets, into the stock market, into real estate. But if you didn't own those, you got destroyed because all the prices went up and you didn't have any assets that went up with it. So Australians need to get far more savvy and not rely on just digging holes in mineral resources and those other things. And we need to start really celebrating our entrepreneurs and creating an environment that's conducive to keep our best and brightest in Australia. I got savage the other week on social media because I said, it probably wasn't a good example, but I said, if someone like Elon Musk relocated all of his businesses to Australia, it would create massive employment. It's not that we have an employment problem, but it would drive wages up because there'd be a demand for people, right? But Australians just jump on the bandwagon of whoever they hate next, and just because it's an outlet for their rage of what they're feeling. But we need to encourage our entrepreneurs. We need to create tax-friendly environments for people who create jobs. In my opinion, we have in Australia payroll tax, which is basically a tax for small businesses. Once you get $1 million payroll, they penalize you with an extra tax called payroll tax to the employer. It's psychotic. It's so we need to wise up and start incentivizing entrepreneurship and supporting entrepreneurs who are out there creating jobs, really getting serious about funding these innovators and helping them, rather than seeing them take off to the United States, where there's more developed capital markets, where there's greater distribution and so on. But we don't. We vilify people who do really, really well, and we don't incentivize them, so they leave.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. It's so true that you say that, because something we always notice is, as soon as someone seems to make it big, they just move overseas, and then we lose out every single time. Australia loses every single time.
Do you think that Australia could be seen as a difficult market geographically for people that want to be successful, so they feel the need to move to the Northern Hemisphere?
It's just a small market. Australia is a small market. But you can do really well in Australia as well. It's just such a difficult place to make money. There's not a lot of people. employees are really, really expensive. And we have labour relation laws now that make every entrepreneur I talk to, whenever I talk to them in Australia, they're just like, I hate people. They're just all the same. They're like, my business would be great if I didn't have freaking employees who are lazy and entitled and, you know, they know the system. Our government, our lefty sort of policies that have been in place have just made doing business so difficult. Like I've got a friend who runs a hair salon. A girl turned up and claimed 10 days of domestic violence leave from the get-go. So this is a new policy where you don't have to show evidence. You can claim 10 days of domestic violence leave that is not accrued. So you don't get 1 day per 3 months that you're there at the employer. You get it from the start. And as soon as the 10 days were used up, then she used up all the holiday pay. Then she used up every other entitlement and then left. And so she never actually turned up and did a day's work and walked out with thousands of dollars. And he suspected that she was doing this with 3 or 4 employers at the same time in the hairdressing industry, where there's a massive shortage of staff. And this good-looking girl is just going around and just stealing thousands of dollars at the same time from Australian employees, small business guys and girls who are trying to feed their families. Because and then you look at the NDIS, the fraud that's in the NDIS. And eventually the people who are paying all the taxes just go, this is just screwed. It's just, I can't get people to work. They want top dollar to work. And then they complain that they bring in immigrants to do the work that Australians won't. When was the last time you went out in Australia to a restaurant and it was mostly Australians serving you? It's not. It's Brazilians. It's people from other countries, because the Aussies don't want to do that work.
Yeah.
Hey, Adam, you made the move to Cyprus, which is so exciting to watch your journey, leaving the Gold Coast and going over there. So what is this stage for you? Your early 50s, is this early retirement? Is this, I just can't handle Australia anymore, I want to get out of here?
Yeah.
Like, what is the decision and how did you come to it?
Yeah, look, don't get me wrong. I think Australia is the most beautiful country. I think it really is, especially, right now I'm in Madrid and I love it. The energy is incredible, but Australia is so clean and beautiful. So I don't want to leave the impression that I don't love Australia. I do love large parts of Australian life. But I turned 50 and I was fine up until somebody put the balloons in my living room and I saw the 50 and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so used to seeing those in restaurants with what I thought were old people celebrating their 50th, going, oh my God, look at those old farts having their midlife party. And then all of a sudden it's me. And I just woke up on that day and I just was like, man, I don't want to spend the next 5 or 10 years, which are going to be the best 5 or 10 years I have left health-wise, because it's, you got to fight for it the older you get. And I don't want to spend it just waking up thinking about conversion rates, click-through rates, optimizing thumbnails, all the stuff that comes with running a business, right? And that's what's taking up my bandwidth. And I'm like, I reckon I've got 20 years of peak mobility left where I can, walk up the Duomo in, Florence, or do 20,000 steps today through the streets of Madrid and go to the Real Madrid Arsenal game tonight and really enjoy it and dance around like a lunatic. That's going to get harder over 70, for example. So it's so finite. And I think about how quickly the last 20 years went. So I just go, what do I really, really want to do? And so I looked at my resources and I thought, okay, well, the biggest liability right now is tax. So I was like, okay, where could I live in the world that's more tax friendly? And I spoke to some high net worth people. I spoke to my accountant and said, guys like me, who've got a little bit of money behind them, where do they go for a good quality of life that's tax efficient and so on? And he said, check Cyprus out. And I'd never even really thought about Cyprus. I never even really knew where it was and I hadn't been there. So I started researching. I found this Mediterranean island that's off the coast of Europe, basically. A couple of hours I can be in Europe. It's got skiing in the winter. It's got some of the most beautiful beaches in the world, like Ayia Napa and others. It's just absolutely stunning. It's not too busy and tax is phenomenal. So I had a look at it and I just thought, you know what? I want to be close to Europe. I want to spend a lot more time doing these things. And Cass was on board, my wife. And so we just said, let's do it. Let's sell up. So we sold everything, literally all our real estate, and just delevered our life out of obligation. We didn't have any debt really at all, but we just I just want to have a life where I wake up in the morning. And right now, last week I sold my home in Australia. It was a trophy home, it's a $7 million on the sand beachfront apartment. It's absolutely rock star. But right now I'm sitting in a 1-bedroom Airbnb above a pub in Madrid, and I'm happier. It's so weird. It is weird. If I swung the camera around, you would see an apartment that you would likely see a university student in, and I'm happy. I am happy. And the thing is, the deposit, the 10% deposit on the apartment that I just sold in Australia could buy 2 of these apartments.
Yeah.
So
it's
crazy. I could have
wild.
one of these in Madrid and one in the south of France, and that's just out of the deposit on what they paid for my house in Australia, and I pay no tax, or not no tax, but close to no tax.
So you've lived the money doesn't make you happy life. You've
100%.
You've learned the lesson.
I had the 2023 911 Targa, my dream car. I've had the Ferraris, I've had the Bentleys, I've had everything. And last night, walking home from dinner, I was just wandering through the back streets, and I walked into this massive Spanish square, which I hadn't discovered. And what drew me was this chanting. And I was like, what is this chanting? And it was Arsenal fans standing on their chairs at a pub, just doing their Arsenal songs, all 10 beers in. And I just sat there and had a cigar and watched these guys carry on like lunatics, and was alive. And I'm like, this is phenomenal. It's 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. I'm having a blast. And tonight I'm going out to the game. And that's, for me, I want to go out in my life and have more highlight reels. I don't want to be, going, hey, did you see how well that thumbnail performed?
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's really the end game. That's why I started this whole thing, is to have agency over my life. And at the moment, Cass and I, we just got back from a week in Tuscany. We joined a group of other people, and we went through Tuscany, and we went through Modena, and we went through Florence. We spent a week in Florence. We e-bike rode through. One short experience I'll share with you. It was just awesome. We're riding through Tuscany. There's 10 of us in the group, and this guy and his family they have an olive grove, and they've set up a bench because they know the e-bike guy who takes these tours through, and they'd set this bench up, just a makeshift bench, and they had a 44-gallon drum with some wood fire in there, and they were wood firing sourdough that they made themselves.
Oh, yum.
They're putting olive oil on there with garlic over the toast, and their own made liqueur. And there's no pay machine. There's no like us on Instagram. It was a family that just wanted to share their produce with us as tourists. There was literally no way to pay them. And we just pulled the e-bikes over, looking over Tuscany, eating this olive oil and balsamic vinegar that they made, and took selfies with them, and there was no other outcome. And I'm like, holy shit, there are still people in the world that do this. Just crazy. And these experiences are out there. And I bought some cake here the other day in Madrid, a little piece of cake. I couldn't eat it all. And I said to the lady who owned the bakery, I said, I don't want to throw this away. It's so good. She goes, no, give it to me. She takes it and wraps it as a gift with a bow on it and gives me to take home. It's just nuts. And Cass looked at me and just shook her head. It'll come out on one of my travel videos shortly. It's just, there's just another world out there where that's worth exploring.
It is interesting. Do you think that with, social media, AI, all of this world that we're going into, do you think that we're all going to start craving more of those moments in life as we move forward?
Yeah, well, I think we might see universal base income, where people are going to have a fixed income from the government, because most jobs are going to be done by AI and robots, a lot of jobs. It's kind of interesting. And that's going to, open up a lot of interesting thought experiments. It's going to be interesting to see whether people lean into socialization and lean into pursuing what they love. I think we'll lose a lot of people into video games and the digital kind of world, but I think there'll be a lot of people that sort of express themselves artistically and do that sort of stuff. And I'm kind of excited about that. I'd love to think that there's some degree of utopia will creep in.
Yeah.
But
Adam, you mentioned, I want to circle back to something that we spoke about earlier, is it does very much feel like Australia has a massive tax problem. It does feel a bit scary for, say, new people who, say you're leaving school now, and then you're always told you're going to uni, you're going to get this huge HECS debt, and then you get the job, you're getting taxed even more. What's the solution so that people aren't going through the system that no longer serves them? And I guess, how do we fix our tax issue?
This is the problem that I hate talking about this, because I'm a positive person by nature, and I'm very optimistic by nature, but I'm very saddened and pessimistic about Australia's future. And I hate saying that as an Australian that was born in Australia and loves Australia. And the reason I have pessimism for Australia is because, in my opinion, it's a political change, right? Like, Australians are really, pre-COVID, very apathetic. I think a lot of Australians are starting to wake up. I think our good nature has been taken advantage of. Our, she'll be right, mate. Australians are pretty docile. The shit that we put up with through that period, I was asleep. I was one of those people that just, did what the government told me to do. Biggest regret of my life. And I think, from a tax point of view, this is just one problem, but it takes real leadership in Australia to change it, because it's not like we were laughing yesterday. We did a tour around Madrid, and we were seeing these carved statues of people past. When you go to Europe, you see these scholars. And Cass said to me, imagine if in Parliament House, or on the front of Parliament House, there was a statue of Albo and then a statue of Gillard. They'd have to have 24/7 security to stave off the amount of dildos that would be strapped to their head every day, right? It's like our culture's just not that. So to actually get somebody strong enough to go into that role and really create reform in Australia, people don't understand how savage Australians are. Australians are absolutely savage to political leaders. They have no respect for political leaders. We throw shoes at them, right? So we recently had Senator Gerard Rennick on our podcast. I think he's the smartest Australian politician we have right now, and he's got great plans for the country. The Liberals kicked him out of the party, right? And I'm like, you just had one of the rarest minds and somebody who's got the political will to lead, and you booted him out of the major party. He'll never get elected outside of a major party in Australia. So he has to go back and lick the boot of the Liberals to have a crack at it. On the other side, we've got Labor, forget about it, right? And then you got One Nation, who I think One Nation have some good intent, but I just don't know that they've got the political leadership skills there and the intellect that's really required. And it's just really, really hard to get a really, really high quality person who's going to not go into the private sector and make a fortune, because in Australia we want them to fly economy on fucking Jetstar to go to the World Economic Forum or the White House. They don't, if they have a private plane that takes them to a meeting with Trump, they're going to get vilified. If they spend $5 on a bloody extra steak, it's going to be on Channel 9. And did you see how Prime Minister just ordered, steak at a restaurant and he had 3 expensive wines? You're never going to attract. I'm not saying that you get somebody that values those things, but they see that, these super smart people going, well, why would I fuck around with that? I'm just going to go into private business and make a fortune. And, because I just don't want to be, because we don't have any decorum at all.
We're kind of our own worst enemy, really, aren't we?
Tall poppy syndrome. Adam, we like to end every episode with our guests showing us an item that's either around them or something that's important to them. Now, you are on the road at the moment in Madrid, so you may not have the item with you, but do you have something that you'd like to share?
I do. I have I have this thing here. So I'll talk about this. This is just a scribe. It's called a Remarkable, which is a digital journal. So you can it's endless and it files things and so on. And it feels like paper to use. It's kind of very cool. But I thought more about that, and I thought I'll share a quick story on this particular subject of things. So for a while I've read a book on minimalism a while ago, and I'm a bit of a minimalist. I'm an anti-shopper. I get the same thrill from getting rid of stuff as most people get from buying stuff.
Yeah.
So, anyway, a true minimalist has something like 40 items in their life that they own in totality. And that's pretty lean when you think about knife, a fork, pair of jeans, a baseball cap, etc. And the guy wrote, it's a Japanese guy, and the Japanese guy said the power of minimalism took a long time to come into his life, but he said he digitized all his photos and so that he didn't have thousands of photos. And while he was going through his boxes of stuff, he found this one train ticket, which his mum on the back had written the turn-by-turn directions to get him from the family rural farm in Japan into Tokyo and out the other side to see his auntie when he was 8 years old. And he said, I found this ticket and it became my most valuable possession when I thought about what my mother would have been going on in her mind to send her 8-year-old boy on a train across Japan with turn-by-turn instructions in pencil, and it was buried in a pile of shit. And he said, so minimalism and decluttering your life gives you an opportunity to isolate and really just keep those things that are most important, and it's one of his 40 things that's framed on his wall. For me, when you move overseas, you have that opportunity to really clean your life out. I got down to like 6 suitcases and a few boxes, and there was one thing I kept, which was a stress ball. It's an orange spongy ball with a smiley face on it. So yellow. It's yellow with a black smiley face, and I've kept that item with me everywhere I go because it's my mum's when she went through brain tumor and cancer and passed away, and she kept that. Mm. And it's one of those items that reminds me every day. It's always been in my office, and I put it in a safe before I left Australia because I didn't want to lose it on the road. But it's a great reminder that life is not guaranteed. My mum died at 58 years old. I'm 51. So don't live your life like you have forever, because you really don't know how long you have. And so that is probably my most precious possession, is that little $1 squeezy ball and a journal that she wrote, a little sticky book, like with just things in it, a poem of when she first came to Australia as an immigrant off the boats, how she felt the day she arrived. Those two items are the things that I most treasure in my life. Money won't bring you those sorts of happiness, but go and get the money, because you have to. It's easy to sit having made the millions of dollars and go, hey, money doesn't make you happy. But, for most of us, at least give yourself a chance to find out.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful to hear that, you're remembering your mum in such a beautiful way, I think, Sweet.
She was the best.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for giving us your time today. If you get the chance, go and check out Unemployable. It is available on all podcast platforms. It's also on YouTube as well. Is the studio still there on the Gold Coast that you?
Yeah.
So you're still dialing in as like every episode?
Yeah. So we do one remote session a week where I come in digitally like we're doing right now, and they do one in-studio session a week with local talent, and then we do the property one every 2 weeks, and we do which I don't do, that's in studio on the Gold Coast, and then we do the Bitcoin one, which I contribute as a correspondent digitally. So yeah, the studio is still very busy.
Well, get around it. Unemployable. Yeah. Adam, thank you very much for joining us, mate.
Thanks so much, Adam.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.